Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Let's start dead on time because I know it's Thursday and I know that you've all got much better places to be. I'm going to share my slides with you so that I can do the quick introduction. Hopefully I've got the right screen. And can you see my slides? Okay. Sorry, Siobhan?
Yes, we can see them.
Awesome, thank you. Okay, so this afternoon we've all come together and we're going to be discussing equipping inclusion leaders to lead effectively. My name is Louise Dawson and I'm absolutely honoured to be the network lead for inclusion for BSME. I'm also, in my day job, the head of inclusion at Jumeirah College. I am the working SEND. I've been doing SEND for about 20 years now since I became a parent of 3 children with special needs. I worked in Hong Kong for 3 years and I have been here in Dubai for 9 years. I've worked at Wellington International and King's and I'm now at Jumeirah College. This afternoon, I'm very, very proud that we are the first BSME network webinar to take place. The BSME have set up the networks across the region. Could I ask you all to mute your microphones if you haven't done so already? Because we can hear you. Thank you. The BSME have set up a program of networks across the Middle East. At the present time, they've launched the subjects of drama, EYFS, geography, history, leadership, modern foreign languages, music, primary and secondary English, primary maths, safeguarding science, SEND, and teaching and learning. And the networks are all going to be hosting 6 webinars each throughout the year, and they're going to have at least 2 speakers on each webinar. But in the back end of the webinars, we've also launched the network forums. So if you log into the bsme.org UK website and go to the networks, you'll find all of the discussion forums there for each subject. As BSME members, you are entitled to join all of the forums, as many as you like. You're also entitled to view any of the webinars. You don't have to, if you're a SENCO, you don't have to stick with SEND. You can join in with the leadership, you can join in with the safeguarding, whichever floats your boat. There are chat forums, so you can deliver questions. If you've got any questions at the end of this webinar, we're going to have Q&A at the end. But then when we sign off at the end of the day, obviously questions come up in your mind, so you can go back out to the forums. There's forums on curriculum. There's forums just purely on SEND, but we're also going to be collating a huge bank of resources on the website as well, so you can contribute anything that you like. So do join me over there. I'm going to be monitoring the SEND one. Other people will be monitoring the other forums, but definitely get involved and talk a bit more about that. This afternoon, we're going to be talking about leadership of SEND, and I'm really delighted to welcome Jenny Feynman and Siobhan Brady. Jenny is currently an independent educational psychologist settling out in Europe. She's in Paris right now, the lucky thing. And she currently works for Real Training as a tutor and delivers support for anybody who is taking the international accreditation for special educational needs coordination. So Real Training, the website is on there for you to look at that if you haven't already managed to achieve that. Siobhan is also joining us, and she is the developmental leader for inclusion and safeguarding at the Founders School. First up, we're going to listen to Dr. Jenny. Dr. Jenny, as I said, is currently in France. She achieved her doctorate in 2016, so very important that we use the doctor. She is also an independent educational psychologist. She is a British trained teacher, and without giving away her age, she has 30 years of experience in developing inclusion. She delivers inclusion across international schools, and has worked extensively throughout Europe and within Cambodia. She is currently practicing out of Paris, France. Hello, Dr. Jenny.
Hello.
You know what I've got done now? Now I can't stop my share. Okay, so I'm now going to allow Jenny to share her slides with you so that we can have her talk through. Excellent.
Okay, so we're up and running.
We are up and running. Welcome, Dr. Jenny. How are you feeling?
Thank you, Louise, for that. I'm actually in Normandy at the moment.
Oh, I do apologise.
Rather than Paris, but it's a bit cold and wet here. Anyway, I'm delighted to be here, and thank you very much. A little bit more information about me, and I think one of the things that's quite clear is that missing from my training and experience is any direct work in the Middle East. And I have to thank my delegates on the Real Training Isenco Award for my insights into the Middle Eastern context, and also my recent conversations with Louise and Siobhan. Now, my presentation will be fairly theoretical, rather a quick overview of some of the issues around leading inclusive practice in international schools. And Siobhan will be discussing more practical applications. So here's the outline of my presentation. I say I'm going to be talking about the factors that equip inclusion leaders to develop culture, ethos, policy, and practice that enable all members of the school community to feel a sense of belonging and achievement. And that's, as you'll see later, where I center my definition of what inclusive practice looks like. And these four related concepts are captured in the acronym PIPE. I quite like acronyms. So the P stands for policies and ethos, and the I, inclusive practice. I'll then go on to talk about the process of change that's involved. And finally, something on effective leadership. And I think those factors can be joined together in terms of policies and ethos underlying inclusive practice requires a process of change driven by effective leadership. Now, when Hornby wrote in 2001, he pointed out that there is a bit of a rhetoric reality gap when it comes to thinking about inclusive practice. These are general statements of intent which drive inclusive practice in schools, and you're probably all familiar with these, which come from the UK SEND Code of Practice. And for those of you working in Dubai, you will recognize this statement, which unpacks the idea of an inclusive ethos and some reality, which could also be captured as some of the barriers to learning, to use a common metaphor. And these are factors that were mentioned by my Isenco delegates, who were asked to reflect on the different agendas they have to deal with in their practices as Senkos working in international schools. And I'm sure many of you will recognize these. Now, perhaps one of the most challenging is the inclusion of students with complex needs, because if we're really thinking about an ideal inclusive education that we're offering our students, how far can we go? How far are we actually able to include all students? To what extent can your school include children whose challenges include physical, cognitive, or sensory disabilities? This slide is rather heavy on text, and I'll leave you to read through the list later. I'll just comment on a couple of items. The philosophy is obviously important, and if you're working to ministry statements of intent, that's probably where you'll start. The objectives, the scope is important. I mean, increasingly, schools are broadening the scope of their policies to include children who are learning English as a language that they don't necessarily speak at home. And in fact, that's often the majority of the students that we're working with. And my doctoral thesis focused on the spoken academic language of this group. And I've included a few slides later on to look at my take on that, and particularly the assessment of these children. This last item is important, the final review date, because as we'll come and see later, inclusive practice is a process. So any inclusion policies should be written with an intention to review and update. it provides a kind of snapshot of current practice, and the review process provides an indication of how inclusive practice in a school is evolving. It also provides the opportunity to set goals in certain areas. So any policy statement really needs to be viewed as a living document. Now, these word clouds were generated as part of a task we ask Isenco delegates to undertake. They visit another school and compare their inclusion practices, both from a theoretical perspective, looking at the documentation, and then what they actually see in practice. And it's interesting to see what words pop out. Here we have send clearly in the middle. Support is a word which figures quite highly. The word inclusion and inclusive practice, we can see it clearly here. Many of these word clouds do have the word inclusion or inclusive practice, but it is quite interesting how the use of language, the narrative, the words we use when we're talking about inclusive practice are really important, because it has a significant impact on the narrative in a school around inclusive practice. It conveys how we're thinking as leaders and helps others move towards more inclusive ways of thinking. For instance, we often use shorthand terms such as SEN or EAL students. And in my feedback to delegates on their written assignments, I often ask them to rephrase these. So we're talking about students first, students maybe with different needs, students who are learning English or still on that developmental path. So moving on to my second theme, the I, the inclusive practice. I'm sure many of you will have heard of Booth and Ainscough. It was their work that really drove a lot of the impetus for change in schools, and this view of theirs that it's not a state but an unending process of increasing participation. Their index for inclusion, I'm sure many of you will have come across it, captures inclusive practice within 3 broad dimensions. So we have the first, which is creating inclusive cultures, and then producing inclusive policies, and then evolving inclusive practices. Again, it's this emphasis on the process. The Index of Inclusion is available in many different languages. I've referenced the 2002 version, which is, I think, when it first came out. There's one that's available now, 2011. It consists of indicators and sample questions, which can form the basis for a planned move towards more inclusive practice. So when we're thinking about inclusive practice, I like to come away a little bit from those sort of top-down institutional practices to think about what it actually feels like to be included. I'll leave you to reflect for a minute on the messages conveyed in these images. How do we identify those children who feel excluded? It's not always as obvious as the picture would suggest on the right. I think to capture inclusive practice as a sense of belonging is really important. I would argue that schools need to create a sense of belonging not only for all their students, but in fact for the whole community, parents, teachers, assistants, administrators, cleaners, technical team. The school where I worked at, where we were careful to include everybody. Can I hear somebody talking in the background there? Yeah. And the other factor I think is an important indicator of inclusive practice is the extent to which everybody has the opportunity to experience successful achievement, whether it's in an individual session or showing work in front of a class. I like the image of this girl in the middle, apparently jumping for joy in a corridor. Another theme reflected in delegates' written assignments is the tension around whether inclusive practice should always take place in mainstream classrooms. To what extent is different provision in the form of small groups or different classes somehow discriminatory? I think the language is important, as I said before, when we talk about different classes rather than special classes or units. But can't underestimate the power of students going to the same school as their siblings, their friends, their children, those living in the same neighborhood. So to sum up this section, here are a few images around the theme of having a sense of belonging and the experience of successful achievement. This is where I'm going to deviate just for a minute to talk a little bit about students where the focus is on their language development. I've always been interested in language development. I used to work in a special school for children who had specific language disorders. And as I moved to work in international schools, I developed a special interest in the challenge presented by children who are learning through a language which is different to that spoken at home. And a question that I'm frequently asked as an educational psychologist is to identify the source of the difficulty. Now, the whole question of diagnosing or labels is not one I'm going to address here, but I want to spend a couple of minutes just on the way I like to address the assessment of children who are learning through a language which is different from that at home. And you'll notice I'm avoiding the term native language or mother tongue. This question of whether they have a learning difficulty or a language difficulty, I like to bin. Because the two are so related, it's often difficult to know. What I like to focus on is to consider how far students are on the path towards academic language proficiency. And academic language, I like the Cummings definition of that, the idea that we're working for students to understand and express concepts and ideas that are relevant to success in schools. The length of time it takes to develop academic language continues to be underestimated, and we can all be surprised and confused by students who have apparently fluent spoken language, but they struggle to understand what they read or to produce written text. It takes a long time. We know it takes a couple of years to develop spoken language. Some seem to do it in even less than that, but it takes much longer to develop academic language proficiency. Children are often referred to me in their third year because they speak fluently, but are still struggling academically. It's amazing how much progress students will often make in that third year, actually, if they're given the chance. But it's about then when they start feeling, well, perhaps they should be doing better. When I'm assessing children who are learning English as a language that they don't speak at home, I like to know where they've lived. I like to know which schools they've attended. And I like to know what languages they speak where, when, and with whom. And the point of this is to build up a picture of the opportunities that they've had for rich exposure to language. Because my research showed that the amount of progress in terms of the speed they make is directly related to the opportunities they've had to develop academic language in any language. So coming back to the P of my pipe, the second P, when we look at statements of inclusive practice, we often see themes of change and progression over time. Here in red, we've got the familiar reference to removal of barriers.
There you are. No, I told the girls, I was like, no, Georgina.
We often, in red, we have here the progressive removal of barriers to learning and participation in mainstream education. Here, it's the progressive development of attitudes, behaviours, systems, and beliefs. This brings me to point out there's an important psychological model that has shown that it's change of behavior that comes before the change of attitude, rather than the other way around. If we can help people change their behavior through training, support, modeling, then the attitude will follow. And it's in this way, I think, that we can support teachers who feel that they don't have the skills or the knowledge, and certainly not the confidence, to help children in their classes. That if we can support them and show them through modeling how it works, how children can develop, albeit very slowly, that will change people's attitudes. And it's that much more than giving them a policy. So I think the previous point about behaviour change preceding attitude change is captured here in Booth and Ainsco's view, that the inclusive practice is not a state, but an unending process of increasing participation. So what can inclusion leaders do to provide, to guide a process of change? How do we plan for that? I think this Kotter's 8-step change model is an interesting one. It has been found useful in planning for change in many different contexts. It was one of my delegates who brought this to my attention. And here it's applied to creating an inclusive school environment. So in order to create the behavioural changes that I mentioned earlier, we need all to develop the knowledge, skills, and very importantly, the confidence that all the children in our classes have a sense of belonging and experience successful achievement. Now, the process of professional development, there are various models and various activities that we can do. But I liked this exercise, which was a draw, label, caption exercise, where teachers were asked to consider what inclusion would look like in their school. And I have to thank one of my delegates for sharing these with me and for allowing me to share them with you. So this was an example of a group of teachers reflecting on this. And this is another one. And it's taking the time to reflect together about the meaning of inclusive education, how it applies in their setting, I think is really very important. So moving on to what makes effective leadership. These are some leadership styles. And I think although we all have perhaps a particular way in which we like to operate, in fact, different situations call for different leadership styles. And it's too simplistic to think that we have just one way of doing things and going about our lives and our roles in leadership positions. It's important, though, to have the opportunity to reflect on this and to know yourself. And another exercise that we ask delegates to do is to carry out a self-study of their own characteristics and personality leadership styles, and also to ask their colleagues to give them direct feedback. This can be quite a painful process at times, but it's very illuminating and very important. I remember when I did this exercise and somebody said to me that I tended to be a bit bossy. And I was really quite shocked about this because I didn't think myself as a bossy person at all, but clearly I was. Now, these effective leadership characteristics, again, are probably familiar to most of you. And there are things, there are exercises we can do to look at to what extent we've developed these qualities, these characteristics. So to sum up, the factors that equip inclusion leaders to develop culture, ethos, policies and practice, enabling all members of the community to feel a sense of belonging and achievement. I've talked a bit about policies and ethos, inclusive practice, process of change, and effective leadership. But in conclusion, how far is inclusive education a pipe dream? Or can we move it to being work in progress? That is, how far it's in the pipeline. Thank you for your attention. Louise, can I hand back to you? There are some references at the end here.
Thank you, Dr. Jenny. That was an ace. I think that the process of change is a very, very difficult one, and I think we are definitely all going through it, especially out here in the Middle East. And do you have any ideas for how we can support through modelling? You talked about teaching teachers through modelling. How do we do that in a busy timetable and a busy schedule? Have you ever seen any good practice that we could steal from you?
When I was a learning support teacher, I mean, I spent a lot of time in the class, but depending on teachers I was working with, it was a team teaching situation, and at other times it was me really focusing on children who needed the support. But I tried to move it much more to a team teaching situation, and in our planning sessions we would plan for that. I was in a school where we had the privilege of working with teachers outside the classroom, looking at what they're intending to teach and talking about how we could support students in the class. And you know, often the things that I was doing with students, they were things that they then took on themselves. But it really wasn't trying to move away from that idea that these students were somehow my responsibility and were special and different. So I wouldn't always work with the students who had been identified. Sometimes I'd work with the others. That was through modelling, but a lot of through discussion as well.
Yeah. So I apologise for anybody that listens in that's outside of Dubai or even outside of the UAE, but one of the things that the KHDA asked us to implement was the notion of support teachers. So we employed people that their direct responsibility was to go into class and to go in and support and teach the teachers rather than teach the children, which was it was an interesting proposal, but it has actually come out of the later documents that have come out of the KHDA. But I do think that that's something that, you know, we should still be considering. So it's more about going into class and modelling within the class than bringing the children out.
For sure.
Another question, the question answerer, Oscar, has already left, but suggest a few models. Can you suggest a few models of inclusive practice? So the question asker has left, so I can't clarify what they mean by that. Inclusive models for inclusive practice. Do you know any off the top of your head, or can I ask you to go away and think about it?
Yes, I'd like a little bit more clarification for that question. But I mean, you know, the thing is that we've moved towards this term inclusive, trying to get away from the idea of special needs and support. Yeah. But nevertheless, those are things that we find ourselves doing. And there are some things which are within our control, such as how we actually do things in the classroom, but there are some that are not. Right. And if we're working within curricula that, you know, basically are just not adapted to the students that we find ourselves focusing on, then you have to sort of move to a different level. So I think it depends where you're coming at this from, and if you're coming at it from a class teacher point of view, yeah, you have one idea of inclusive practice. If you're coming at it from a teacher, a support teacher, or a director, or an educational psychologist coming in from the outside, you have other models.
different viewpoints. So, and what I'll do is I'll go back and seek some further clarification. She had to go off to a meeting, but and then if I can, I'll send you an email if I need to. So if anybody's got any questions, do add them into the chat that's going on along the side of the forum. So I'm going to now introduce you to Siobhan. Siobhan Brady is currently here in Dubai. She's been here since 2017. I'm honoured to call her a friend as well as a colleague. She works at GEMS Founders School in Dubai, and she's the development leader for inclusion and safeguarding. She started out with her secondary PGCE, and she's got the National Accreditation for Special Education Needs Coordination, which is the UK version of the international programme that Dr. Jenny is a tutor on with Real Training. Although Siobhan didn't do hers with Real Training, I did. She was previously an assistant principal at a specialist school for children with autism in the UK. She's also very, very proudly done the Optimus Send Inclusion Award and been very successful in gaining that award out here. And I believe she may have been the first one out here to do that. And she's a BSMO inspector, so she's a very, very busy person. And she has crazily now started studying for her MPQH. You are indeed crazy, Siobhan. If you'd like to join us.
Yeah, thank you very much, Louise, and thank you for that introduction as well. Hello, everybody, on this lovely Thursday afternoon, and I'm, delighted that you can join us on possibly the best day of the week as well. So, yeah, as introduced, I'm currently in GEMS Founders in Al Mazar, which is up near the airport, if you know Dubai. But I'm actually going to be talking a little bit about my role when I moved to Dubai a few years ago. So, to start, I'm going to be talking about our Al Barsha school. So I think it's always important when we're talking about inclusion is that it's a context. We're all in very different places with very different resources. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about our school to give you an idea of what we have and who we are. So yes, we're in Dubai. We're a mid-market school, and that's roughly our average of our fees there, so you can maybe compare where you are as a school. We are foundation stage 1 all the way to our year 13s. It's our 5th year of operation, so we've been through 2 KHDA or DSIB inspections. We've got 4,250 students, that's how many seats we have, and they are all full. We have a waiting list as well. When it comes to our students with special needs, for our wave 2 and 3s, it's about 6%. We do have 6 SEND teachers. There's myself, who's a head of inclusion. I'm very, very, very lucky to have a deputy as well, and also a SENCO who also deals with our primary stage. We have 30 LSAs, all of which are funded by parents, but they are on our school visa, so they are employed by us. And we have a specialist autism centre within our school called Small Steps. In our first inspection, we got good. So it was quite, it was a celebration for us. So mid-market scores get good, and our first inspection was amazing. And also we got good with outstanding features in our BSO. And as important in all of these things, and I'm going to be coming back to this a little bit later, is I do have a very supportive principal who we do share a very common vision. So that's the context of the school where we're at the moment. So I'm just going to go back when I moved here, and it was very new to me. I was an assistant principal of a school with 70 students with an EHCP or a diagnosis of autism. And so I turned up thinking, I've no idea what I'm doing. So if you're in a position at the moment where you have maybe just started this job and it might feel a little bit overwhelming, it's only 4 weeks in, you know what you're doing. So please keep that in mind, that we were all new once. And this might be a really good time for those new staff, but also for anybody who might have been in the role for a little bit longer, because you can ask these questions wherever you are in the world. And I think when it comes to policy, we really do need to question what was there before, because just because it's in a policy doesn't mean we need to keep it. So when I started, I considered these questions. So what was the school already offering? What was already there when I inherited it? So I joined in 2017, and that was our second year of operation. So in our first year of operation, we opened with 1,800 students on the first day, with very little admission process. It was, everybody was welcome, everybody was in the school. And so the first year, my colleagues before me were fighting fire, day to day, assessing students, identifying students. So I came in the second year and we were still firefighting. So, but what were we offering? So I had to think about that. Who was getting the most support? Who was getting the most time with our amazing staff? Was it equally distributed, or was it those families who may have shouted the loudest, or was it those children who had the highest needs? Were they getting more than other children? Who is in the department and what are their roles? So actually looking at your team and thinking, is this the best that we can offer with these colleagues that you have? So what are their roles? Are they being utilised to the maximum support, maximum amount to support the maximum amount of students? How much of my role is proactive and reactive? And I'm laughing because I don't know. I still don't know to this day. I would say that I'm very lucky that I do have that team, but in that first year, I would just go 90-10, 90% reactive. We were still trying to get things in place, but I always had in the back of my mind, what are we going to do? How are we going to move this department forward? Who's held to account for SEN students within the school? Is it just me? Is it my team? Is it the wider school? So at the moment, all of these questions, I hope that you're thinking and actually having this time to reflect, because I imagine wherever you are, that at the moment with everything that's happening, it can be quite hectic. So please use this time to really consider your department and moving it forward. Who supports me? Who am I going to go to for guidance? And what is expected here? And I meant that in the sense of where I was. So I was in Dubai. What is the norm here in regards to inclusion? And do I need to continue this model? Is this something that I want? Do I like it? Can we improve it? What can I do with it? So just because you've inherited something doesn't mean that you need to stick with it. So there I was, day one, and I think my deputy, Mr. Nalaka, is here at the moment. Day one, I didn't even know that we charge parents for LSA, so literally not a clue. So it was all about learning. So when I was looking through the policy, what we did as a school, our provision was very much of the off-the-shelf, one-to-one support or that we would have. So it wasn't anything sort of bespoke, and at the same time reacting to things that were happening in the school. So that was there. The accountability at that point was still falling on the shoulders of the head of inclusion and the team. And that we had 3 special needs teachers at the beginning. So obviously I showed you the numbers before, it has grown since then. But so we had 3 SEN teachers. And so I had to think about their roles and who they were supporting. And a lot of it, because of what was the norm within Dubai, is that it was a lot of that one-to-one interventions with those individuals, depending on the need they needed. So I had this in mind. Now, on top of that, some of you might recognise this document. Dubai launched the Dubai Inclusive Education Framework Policy. That's me, you can tell it's Thursday afternoon. But you can see the document. So they launched this, which was brilliant because it really gave everybody a push that as Dubai, we are going to have to improve our inclusion within the schools here. Now, if you are new to the role, this is a really good how-to guide on how to set up an inclusion department. So if you are currently struggling, or you think, where do I start? Or maybe you're about to move somewhere else, whatever it is, have a read of this, because it's really clear about how to start and develop an inclusion department. And if you are from the UK, you'll be used to hearing about the SEN Code of Practice. Now, very, very similar, but obviously with the SEN Code of Practice, there will be a mention of funding. Okay, we don't have that luxury. So by all means, for me, if you want, there is no funding, it is parent paid for, etc., etc. Have a read of that framework, because I think it would apply wherever you are, especially in the Middle East. Now, within this document, it has just this little quote that I've pulled out, and it's that to ensure that all leaders at all levels are held to account for the quality provision and outcomes of students who experience SEND. I was very lucky, and I will keep repeating this, because I did have a principal and a leadership team who were already on board with this. So when the framework came out, we didn't really have to do much changing. We also had the Small Steps, which is a specialist autism unit within our school for children who are part of our school, but they need quite intense ABA support. So we were already ahead of the game, but it was really good to see that Dubai were moving in this direction. So we had that transition year. So that's my first year, 17, 18. So adapted the policy slightly. Our SEND staff were no longer, I was encouraging them to do as much group work as possible, because we identified that language and social skills was probably where we needed to improve the most. So no point doing it with a child and an adult, when actually they would be probably more likely to use those language skills with peers. So we moved away from that one-to-one and we went to that group. We also introduced IEP, well, we didn't introduce it, we already had them, but we changed the way that we did IEPs, and they were a smart way. And if I ever present on how we do our IEPs, as a summary, it's very much like the EHCPs in the UK, where it's a team around the child approach, and it really focused on what they needed. It wasn't just an administrative task of a bit of maths, a bit of English and something else. Like, we actually considered the needs of the children. And that actually supported the interventions in the group, because we could actually consider those children's needs and be pairing them or grouping them with other children. So we moved away from just a tick box exercise of having an IEP to having something that will change the child's life, but just as important was to change the parents' lives as well, to take some of that demand from them. And also, again, depending on where you are, you will have different centres that you might work with. And we wanted to hold them to account as well, because parents are paying a lot of money for it. So we invited them in as well, and they were part of our provision that we would offer as part of getting to those outcomes. So that was one thing we introduced. But accountability still was within the department and within myself. So that was that year. But we got to the end of that year, and the data was shocking. And you know, this was our data for our cohort, and how we measured progress and measured it was basically 12 months progress was on target. And so you can see here that the reading, writing and maths was nowhere near 12 months. So what we could see is that something needed to change within the classrooms. But what I did get from the data was the introduction of those new IEPs showed that our SEND teachers knew our children really well, because actually how we do the IEPs is they're already quite challenging for the whole academic year. But the fact that we were making good progress against our IEPs showed that they knew what they were doing with the children, because they were doing really well. And so I had to really consider what was the best path next. Dr. Jenny said there that schools are encouraging obviously more inclusion, which means more children needing support. And it can be hard for our classroom teachers to have children in their class with quite significant need and additional need. And so in our school, and again in a bit of context, we do have 31 children in a class. So 30 children plus our one tier 3 child, it was a lot of demand on our teachers. So I really had to think, and coming from a specialist background after sort of being in mainstream secondary, I wanted to have some sort of blended approach to what we offer as a school. So I went away and thought about big things need to change. So what we introduced as a school, because I did have a fantastic team of SEN teachers, which then grew to 6 teachers as well, we introduced a provision called Flourish. And this was a small group teaching from, well, it wasn't then, but it is now, year 1 to year 8. And basically those children went out for English and maths every day with their SEN teachers, because interventions are great, but usually what an intervention is doing is trying to plug a gap that has been missed before. So instead of trying to plug gaps and trying to play catch up, with the English and Maths being taught in a smaller group with a specialist teacher, it really did give the students a chance to actually engage fully within that environment, instead of them doing maybe something different within their classroom, which is not inclusive. So these children went into these groups. If you were to walk into an English class and they were doing Charlie and Chocolate Factory in the mainstream cohort, and you walked into the Flourish classes, they were also doing Charlie and Chocolate Factory. The whole point is that they are not feeling disconnected from their peers. It's just 2 lessons a day where they go to their Flourish classes. And the reason why it's Flourish is that our school is GEMS Founders School, and it's Growth, Flourish, Succeed. So our Flourish is why we came up with that name. I wanted to take away some of that funding from parents, because no longer do those parents need to pay for a part-time LSA, because that child is getting the English and Maths that they need. Generally, it tends to be a calmer environment, and they are not meant to be in the Flourish classes forever. For some students, they go in and they come out again after some sort of intense Maths or English. They don't have to go to both. And then we did have interventions, and we do have interventions that are separate from Flourish, but it really was a big change, because not only did we have to change how we do things, I also had my special needs teachers who had been working in this small group setting, might not have been as exposed to the curriculum, and obviously I'm talking to my colleagues obviously who are in inclusion, but you can end up being excluded because you're inclusive. So I was always conscious that it was my amazing team, they weren't part of the bigger school. So it was really considering their roles were changing, they were becoming teachers, and so who's going to be held to account for them, because they're teaching English and Maths at the same time as the mainstream teachers. So we also changed the accountability, and this is just a snapshot of the document that we've got, and it just shows the different layers of leadership. So if I'm changing the provision and I'm changing the expectations of SEN teachers, I also had to change the accountability of the leaders in our school. And I don't know how good that is on your screens, but it really does show, and if you were to go into a bit more detail about what it is everybody has got a role to play in special needs within our school. It isn't to be passed on or anything like that. It's everybody is part of our accountability within the school. And to do that, it meant that those SEN teachers who would have sort of been line managed by myself, they've actually now embedded within the school. So those SEN teachers, so say it's Year 1 Flourish, the Year 1 Flourish teacher is line managed by the Year 1 teacher because they're a teacher. And what we've seen as a benefit from that is those SEN teachers are now in the meetings with their colleagues within that year group. So they are able to help with planning and support and adaptation. So instead of me holding on to all this knowledge as a department, being able to allow them to be sort of within different departments meant that that knowledge and that experience can be shared even better. So instead of having a CPD every, I don't know, 3rd month, they actually could get it all the time. And I think that's the point, is thinking about the best way, the most effective way, and to improve our provision, because our teachers are mostly newly qualified teachers. So we could put on lots and lots of CPD for our teachers, but until you are very, very confident in the classroom, it's really hard to have other children with additional needs within that room. So we had to really think about the best thing for our children, our teachers, and our school as a whole. And so this is what came of it, really. So this bit here, hopefully you can see my cursor. So this bit here is what I showed you before. That was before Flourish. When we first had Flourish, you can see I said before 12 is on target. We saw an improvement, double almost there for Flourish, and the mainstream cohort, their progress was 13. So even in reading, our Flourish students were making better progress than their mainstream peers, and we always like that word, better than. So that was in our first year. And then last year we just had, that was our 2nd year of Flourish. Again, our Flourish students made better progress than their peers who made 13 months. So it was a big change, and even now it's still explaining how Flourish is embedded in the school and etc., but it really does show that to make an impact you're going to have to make big changes and risky changes as well, and that's when you need that support from other people. So that's that document I was saying before, just bigger, but basically it's same expectations. So our SEN teachers were running the interventions and they're doing the IEPs, but these are highly skilled, qualified teachers. And so I needed to raise their profile and their expectations, and I'm sure some of them are in this now going, yep, to be on par with teachers, because I didn't want it to be a separate entity. I want them to be part of it. And it's now seeing it in the years as it's progressed, it is amazing to see those teachers working with their new teams, because that was the whole point of this, is that I wanted them to be within the school. You'll then see the different layers that we have in school. So where it says heads of year, that's our middle leadership team, heads of key stage, our extended leadership team, and then we have our SLT and XLT. And everybody has a role to play within that. And then finally, we also have from the top, so our XLT and our governance, which is, we call them the LAB for our school. But it was about other people understanding the importance of special needs within the school, and how you can't do any of this and do it well if everything is just goes back to the person or the people within the school. You're never going to improve teaching if there isn't people there to go, oh, have you considered doing this and this for that cohort of students? And if you're only doing that every so often, you're maybe not going to have the impact you have. So if you've got those teachers within your school, special needs teachers, or you might have learning support assistants that are employed by the school, try and get them within the network of the school, because I think it really does have an impact of raising the profile just as much as improving the quality of teaching. And so, yeah, so about embedding, and I cannot bear when people say, oh, they're in their department, or that's their child, because they're not theirs, but mine. They are everybody's child, because that's when things are not inclusive, when it all falls on one person to support potentially hundreds of children in our situation. So, and I also know from being in special needs is that we equally like them being ours, and that we want to keep hold of them, because we want to make sure that we give them everything that we can. But by doing that, we are limiting their progress, because we are also not helping other teachers to improve their practice. And so I do think there needs to be a shift in accountability to be an inclusive school, because I think as a head of inclusion, handing over that accountability, and it's not giving it up, I'm not saying any of that, but I think by sharing that accountability really does help those individuals, and it really does show that your school is genuinely as inclusive as it can be. So on my final note, and I put it as the bullet point in the end, is that a supportive principal who wants an inclusive school, who wants the best practice and who is open to change, you've got to work with your principal to improve provision, because you cannot do this on your own. And it is about it coming from the top, and Dr. Jenny mentioned this as well. You can be the cheerleader for the inclusion, you can be the go-to person, but if it's not everybody who is on board with it, it's going to be a challenge. So as part of your reflection of your department, how you want to move forward, you really need to take those key people with you on that, because if you don't, you'll be fighting a losing battle. And so from me and my leadership, it's only so much I can do until I need the next element approved, and that would have been by my principal. So for me to have all of that, I needed to work with him, with the senior leadership team as well, to move it forward and make big changes, because it is a risk. I'm not saying that it wasn't a risk, it might not have worked, but then after seeing how well those children have done, not just academically, the academic side that I just shown you there, but the social side of it, the communication of them, and also the empowerment of our inclusion teachers, our special needs teachers as well, to be part of that. So hopefully there's something in there that you can see on a practical level that maybe you could take an element of. And yeah, so thank you very much. If you do have any questions, obviously pop it in the box, and I will hand you back over to Louise.
You don't get away that easily. I've got a couple of questions for you. Ashleen O'Connor, welcome Ashleen. Feel free to unmute yourself at any time during this conversation if you wish. Ashleen, join us in. Ashleen said, what you mentioned there that the school was about 6%. What percentage do you feel a school should be if you included wave 2 and wave 3 students?
Yeah, so the number we base it on is 15%. So I don't include my wave 1 students because they're quality first teaching, and so the reason why I give the tier 2s and the tier 3s is because of how I work out the practical side of things, how I work things out. So our classroom teachers have 31 children in a class, so therefore our SEN teachers have 31 cases in their on their caseload. Yeah. So there isn't a perfect number by any mean, but I think again is that being equal to the teachers. So the teachers have 31 children, our SEN teachers have 31 children, but in Flourish they might have 12 to 15. But when it comes to passports, IEPs, you know, they're responsible for them. So to keep things fair and equal, that's where I keep the number from. Is there a perfect number? I compare our tier 3 numbers with the EHCP numbers in the UK, just to see if we're sort of on the right track. Because how I would say, how we identify children, which is a whole different thing, is our wave 3s. If we were in the UK, I would be applying for an EHCP, or they would already have one. And so I do try and mirror, so I would look at the reports that are released annually and see if we're actually in about the same range as them. But 15% is our number when I include the tier 1s.
Does that answer your question? Because I think the question is, does KHGA or do any governments, they never give us a percentage. They ask us to work towards something that's not really written down anywhere. Would you agree? Ashley? Yeah,
and there's always rumours, isn't there? I think the rumour's 15%, so I'll go with that then.
Stop overdoing my work.
yeah. So no, I don't think there's a black and white, but I do think even the other way of doing it is working with other schools and comparing your numbers, because it's a lot of demand. And again, you know, I'm aware that I might have a really big department compared to maybe what you've got, and it's actually capacity, because you don't want to have so many students that you can't support and you're not giving them the best that you can do. Yeah. So you've really got to consider,
doesn't it, when you're talking about different needs, different identifications, different profiles of children and different teaching, etc. Ashleen, was there anything you wanted to add on that?
No, that's really helpful. Thank you. I was just wondering, because obviously, you know, when you get to a certain percentage and you do start to question, I mean, I always, with open arms, I want to take in every child that's coming through the door. However, you do have to kind of take a step back at times, don't you, when you are limited with staffing, and kind of think, is this actually going to benefit the students? And at what point do you does it become, you know, weighted wise? Does it, is it actually?
I think that's personalised to every year group within your sector as well. So what your teachers can cope with, what your leadership can cope with, and what your therapists can cope with. So I think it's very, very personalised. There is no set number. I think we're all working towards, and also it depends who you're putting in that 10% or that 15%. Some people are putting in additional needs where they're not identified. Some people are only using identified. There still hasn't been clarity, certainly in this area, of who is included in these numbers and who isn't.
Yeah, I think the latest research from the UK had said on average, depending, but on average across schools last year in the UK, it was in and around on an SEND register 10%. But again, I don't know exactly, if I was to drill down into that, would that be students that that did have a care plan or not. Yeah, so it's just interesting to kind of hear from other schools and see what percentages they're at. But
I think originally they said about dyslexia was 1 in 10 children have dyslexia, so I think that's probably where the 10% comes from, but that doesn't
maybe
how many children have autism, how many children have sensory needs, how many children, it doesn't really cut it. I think it's what your school can cope with at this time, and you're right, not doing the wrong thing by individual children.
Yeah, no, that's really helpful. Thank you.
Thanks, Ashley. Burr Catton asked, I know because I've worked with you quite a bit, that you've got the Flourish group, and that your Flourish group is part of your mainstream school and is you work with that under the KHDA regulations and the academic regulations. I also know that you've got another provision which works under the CDA regulations that you work in partnership with another school. So the question it was, at what level would your children access the Flourish versus the mainstream versus your alternative provision that you have? And
okay, so
do you want to add anything before Siobhan talks? This was Burr Carton's question. If you want to unmute yourself, you're very welcome to join in the conversation. Hi, Burr.
Hi. No, I don't have anything else to add. You've worded it better than I did. It's the end of the day here, so I'll leave it up to you to answer based on how she's worded it.
Yeah, no problem. So so our so Small Steps is it is an ABA provider within our school, and there are children. So the parents can go to them straight away and say, you know, I know my child needs this. They can afford, you know, that provision of school, and so they would go to that as part of it being like a separate entity to our school. There are children who apply for the school, who I will assess, and I will then recommend that in order to best meet their needs, it would then be through Small Steps. So through the assessment process, I would pick up on students who would need to have that provision. When it comes to Flourish, it is not a black and white answer that you need to have this, and this, because each case, each child is very, very different. And I say 12 just as the number that I've always used, but it's because our numbers are quite big in the classroom, and half is 15, so 12 to 15. There isn't an answer for that, because sometimes that environment isn't appropriate for that child. So we have children who might be in secondary school who socially it wouldn't be appropriate for them to be in Flourish. So we would support them in another way. Equally, we have high functioning students who can access the maths and the English of the mainstream classroom, but the environment itself is too overwhelming. So they would then also be in Flourish, and the SEN teachers are amazing and they're skilled, and because they share the planning as they would do with the whole year group, they have the challenge as well as they have the support within that classroom. So it is that cohort is on a case by case, and I'll give it as an example. We have currently some of those students full-time in school, and one of the classes, just out of chance really, they're all boys. I had an assessment the other day with my colleagues had an assessment the other day with a child who would be in Flourish, but she was a girl. And the question is how did the family feel about that? Because they're more than welcome to join the school, but how would she feel being in a class just full of boys, especially at the moment, because they're in full time and they're in their bubbles? So it isn't just you know, you get to this point and you go in. There's work with the teacher as well. When a child leaves Flourish, there's usually a little bit of a waiting list for someone else to come in as well. So yeah, that's how we manage it, and it is on a case by case.
Okay. I had a question from Mr. Akhtar, which I have answered privately in the chat about the graduated response. The graduated response is 3-tiered level. I use the word wave because levels for me applies to their academic curriculum. I know that you don't use waves or levels, you use tiers.
We use tiers because of SIMS.
But the idea behind it is the same regardless. So the KHDA use levels. The idea is the same. A level 1, wave 1, tier 1 child is a quality first teaching child. They may have an identification of a barrier, which is sensory or dyslexia, but they are inside the classroom being supported by the teacher. And our job as heads of inclusion would be to monitor and dip in and out when that child might need something more or something less. But we would still monitor and we'd still provide the paperwork and still provide the support to the parents and the family. The tier 2, wave 2, level 2 children will be having some form of intervention, some form of support. That might be as little as exam access arrangements in year 11. It might be as much as having 3 to 6 lessons within the learning support department. So a step up from quality first teaching. Wave 3, tier 3, level 3 child would have a significant amount of support. So they might be accessing speech and language, occupational therapy. They may drop a GCSE. They may have, they may be within your Flourish group. They may be within a specialist centre. They might be on Rahal. So that's your top level, highest need. So if you and the barriers between the layers, the tiers, the waves is always very fluid, and it's about what that child's personal level and need is. So I say if they access an intervention, they're automatically level 2, wave 2, tier 2. But if they have a significant amount more support and they're taking up, if they're taking up a lot of my time, they're automatically wave 3, tier 3, level 3, or a large amount of time from another member of staff. But their graduated response is actually an international thing, and it's in the Dubai Inclusive Education Policy Framework. Which is why we're using it here. But anyone within a British school would be using the graduated response anyway.
Yeah, and in answer to into Bear's question, actually, the only category that we do pick for Flourish is they're either on tier 2 or tier 3. Because of this graduated approach, it isn't all the tier 3 students in there because it doesn't work, and we use it like a speedometer. We've got a speedometer within ours, and it just shows like that it's very flexible. You know, the children don't necessarily need to be on the SEN register at all. If obviously they're not getting anything different from anybody else. So every school will be different. But yeah, sorry, in answer to your question before, tier 2s and tier 3s are the only criteria that are set in stone. But that's because of the graduated approach side of things.
I think you probably operate in the same way that I do, that the children can move between the tiers. So they may be quality first this term, tier 1 this term, but they might go to tier 2 next term, but then they might go back to tier 1 again the term after. It's very, very fluid. I think that's the title of our job should be fluid operators or fluid leaders. We had a question about payments for additionally charged staff. So out here in the Middle East, if we want to put in a learning support assistant or additional intervention outside the standard school offer, we charge additional money. And the KHDA this year have put into place that if you charge if the school charges for any additional services, there is a form that we have to fill in, and that is on the KHDA portal. The KHDA have 2 portals. One is for the inspection and one is for everything else like admissions. So on the admissions portal, there is a section with a form to fill in. I have actually made a short video on that. It's on my YouTube channel. So if you come into the network's chat forum on the BSME website, I'll put a link into there about how to access the form, who needs to have the form filled out, how you complete it, and how you upload it back into the KHDA website. I have done, it's literally a 10-minute video that might be supportive. I'll put that into the BSME network. Into the network forum in the resources.
Thank you so much, Lois. Thank you.
So welcome. In the forum, I will also put a copy of the Dubai Inclusive Education Policy Framework, because like the Code of Practice, like the DSM in the US, this is good practice. So whether it is your statutory regulation or not, for us it is, but even if you're in Kuwait, it's actually a really good model for implementing into your school and taking you through the process. So it's useful to read, take from it what you need to. Obviously it won't be statutory for you, but it does rely on the Code of Practice in Australia, and it takes some out of America. So it's an international program. I'll put all 3. There is the DIEPF, then they brought out a second one which helped us and gave us a bit more guidance, and then this in 2019 they released the directives. So there's 3 documents that I'll put up into the resources on the BSME.
Yeah, and just on that question as well, so the Flourish provision, the SEND teachers, that all comes out of our central budget as a school, which is why I do show like our fee point as a school, because we are a mid-market school, and I believe that if we can do it, I don't understand why other schools can't do it. And I'm pretty sure my principal will tell me that there's a lot more to it than that, Siobhan. But for me, like, it just shows that if people want to do it, that you can find ways of having something like that. So yeah, the only thing that's paid for in our school is that small steps that I mentioned. And if a child has a one-to-one learning support assistant, everything else is part of their actual school fee.
Right. How do we get access to the forum? So the webinar is going to be available on the network. Okay, you can freely share the video. It will afterwards with your friends and colleagues. It is a BSME, but we don't mind it being shared wider. Feel free to join any network that you like. You can watch all the other webinars, whether they are live or recorded, on the forum. To get to the forum, you go to the bsme.org.uk website. There is an option for professional learning. When you click on professional learning, click on networks, and then choose the SEND network. And you may need to register if you haven't done it before. Register, join in with the forum over there. Okay, lots of additional resources. I don't think I've got any more questions coming in, so I'm going to wrap this up so that we can all go and start our weekend. The next SEND webinar is on robust inclusion evidence for inspections and accreditations. This is Siobhan very kindly gave us an example of the way that she presents data to show progress for the school, but more importantly to show progress for the students. So the robust inclusion evidence for inspections and accreditations will show you a little bit more widely how we do that. And you all have the contact details of BSME, so feel free to contact them if you've got any questions, if you didn't pick up my email address in the chat. I don't think I've got any more questions. No. If anybody's got anything quickly, do they want to unmute themselves and put their hand up? I do have 10 minutes before I need to get to my next weekend appointment. No. One new message. No, I've just got thanks coming in. So it just leaves me to say thank you very much, Dr. Jenny, coming in from France. Very much appreciated. I think I might find myself another holiday destination. Thank you very much, Siobhan. It's okay, I won't be coming to Dubai. No. Already here, can't get out. I hope you all have a lovely, lovely, lovely weekend. I hope you enjoyed it. Join the forum. See you in November. Stay safe. Wear those masks. Keep those hands clean. Take care. Have a great weekend.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Jenny and Siobhan, you can stay on if you like. We'll have a quick debrief.